Great. Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. That's given me a lot to think about and follow on with regards to my work as an archaeologist here in the school at the University of Queensland. So my work mainly is focused on the eastern part of Australia, although I do move towards the central area just on the edge of the Simpson. You know, we, in archaeology, the heritage legislation of the eastern states is really heavily biased towards the protection of these dots on the maps, these sites. And you can see from this work that Richard and I and a few colleagues made a comment on a few years ago now in relation to the destruction of cultural landscape without any real consideration of the values. This is the first attempt to prosecute someone under the new Queensland Cultural Heritage Act. You can see that the sites are documented along roadways and transects where there's human activity or survey, and provide a very limited understanding of what the actual cultural landscape looks like. And here is the site of Kingsvale Station here, which is right next to the Quincan area and probably had the same sort of values as Quincan country. The state unsuccessfully attempted to prosecute the landholder who cleared the area without any consideration of cultural heritage values. Because there were no sites recorded on that landscape, the magistrate threw the case out. I've worked quite a bit with Richard actually in the north on a few different projects using archaeology as a way of engaging with certain stories from the past, and certainly the work that we have done undertakes a careful consideration of the broader landscape and some of the issues associated with them. When we talk about a site in archaeology, it essentially is a place that represents a particular focus of past human activity. And if this is the key textbook that's used to teach archaeology in Australia, and sites can be divided in different ways. Indigenous sites are broken down as middens or rock art or stone artefact scatters or burial sites. And then Indigenous historical sites are those places that can be associated with ethnographic stories, but also stories relating to contacts at places like the Kinchela Boys' Home in New South Wales, or the Convincing Ground in Western Victoria, the earliest documented massacre site in Victoria. So the term site is used regularly within archaeology, and it has had a heavy influence on the way that we document heritage across the eastern part of Australia. My first job was a government archaeologist with what used to be called the Victoria Archaeological Survey. It became Aboriginal Affairs Victoria, and I was employed on the Key Sites and Places project, and documenting key sites and places that were nominated by Aboriginal people. And curiously, in Victoria, where contact is very early, many of those sites and places included sites that were recorded by the VAS, the Victoria Archaeological Survey, in the 70s, but also historic places like Lake Condar Mission, Corranderk, Ebenezer Mission, these places where there were rich Aboriginal histories. So in places where there is a significant disconnect, I think the concept of the site has played an important role in reconnecting people with cultural landscapes. In archaeology, of course, we don't really think of breaking up the landscapes into tiny dots on the map. That's not what we teach. We think more along the lines of landscape archaeology, and we look at cultural landscapes. And Robin Torrance who works in Papua New Guinea at the Australian Museum, talks about the term landscape and taking in all physical and natural components of the terrestrial environment. Should be combined with seascapes to encompass adequately the settings where human behaviour took place. Adding cultural to land and seascapes emphasises the role of the individuals who conceptualised these spaces and actively created and modified them in culturally specific ways. And if you're interested in looking at a variety of different ways that a multidisciplinary approach to investigating cultural landscapes, this is one of the main textbooks we use in my archaeology field school, thinking about how to record landscapes. And certainly we run the field school for the last 4 years down in the north coast of New South Wales. This is Harry Creamer, who was the sites anthropologist employed by IATSIS, but part of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and he worked with that boxer, what was his name? The Aboriginal boxer Kelly, Ray Kelly. Worked with Ray Kelly, documenting many places across New South Wales. And there was a view that, look, all the real cultural places are in the northern part or in the west. Very little knowledge still exists in New South Wales. In the 1970s, I think they demonstrated there was still a great deal of cultural knowledge about a whole range of places. There was a lot of gaps as well, and this survey was very biased towards the stories recorded by older men. But we work in this landscape today and looking at the broader cultural landscape. So at Clybucca and Stewart's Point, and these are very large midden complexes, a site complex originally recorded. It extends for some 14 kilometres, this complex, but in reality it includes thousands of individual sites. The idea of this research is that it's supporting the development of a national heritage listing, which will preserve the broader landscape. And in the case further south around Crescent Head and Point Plummer, which is on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, where there are a number of sites that have been recorded, it's intended to support a Indigenous Protected Area nomination that's being put forward. So that area was originally investigated by Isabel McBride in the 60s. Here we have a photograph from the early 20th century of people collecting oysters in that landscape, and we look at these sites within the broader cultural landscape. It's a multidisciplinary approach to investigating these places. Archaeologists sometimes get in hot water, I believe, when they start to investigate cultural places and attach to them significant antiquity. So this site in particular was a sacred women's site. There were knowledge from traditional owners of several generations of use of that place as a woman's site, but archaeologists have extended that back now to 7,000 years, suggesting that the stone tools were manufactured consistently over that time. This is the earliest documented woman's site in Australia. I think when archaeologists start to move into that territory, we have to be very cautious. Similarly with Gumunguru, this site here, it's sort of taken on a life of its own. It's a place that doesn't have a strong ethno-historic record, and I think there's been a lot of creativity in reconstructing the story of these places. So sometimes archaeologists dabble in these sensitive places and try to attach further meaning to it using archaeology. It's a very complicated area to work within. And we've found this a bit in Mythica country. Over the last few years, 10 years now, we've been undertaking research out in Channel country, 3 days drive west of here, right on the edge of the Simpson Desert. And the Mythica were, it's a very rich sort of pastoral land. So it's some of the best cattle country in Australia. It has this natural alluvium that occurs every couple of years. And so, you've got this rich cattle country, and it's supported very large Aboriginal populations, what we can tell from the ethno-history. The neighbouring group, the Wonkunguru and the Simpson Desert, still maintain a great deal of language and culture, but the Mythica were absolutely devastated by European contact, and There are many accounts of warfare. People like Tom Griffiths have documented, and many of the people who survived eventually moved on to Palm Island and other places. So a lot of disconnection from country. People continue to work on stations. This area is a classic sort of boom and bust landscape where you get this extraordinary semi-annual event occurring where it turns into an inland sea. And it creates this absolute bust in ecological activity. Boom in ecological activity. And then we get these drought phases where you get collapse of these systems. Our understanding from the paleoecology is that a lot of the water has been lost since the 19th century, so 50% of the water has been taken from the Artesian Basin, so there would have been a lot more standing water prior to European contact. We've recorded hundreds of sites and large site complexes across the landscape. The most prominent of these massive they're mega sites, really. Massive stone quarry sites where they're extracting grinding stones to process grain, and some of these extend over several kilometres. Alice Duncan Kemp was an amateur historian who wrote a great deal about this place, and this is just an example of her discussion around demography. We have, amateur ethno-historic accounts. She was a very regular correspondent with the curator of the Anthropology Museum here in the 60s and 50s, Winterbottom, and he referred to her as his most valued correspondent. There are numerous accounts of villagers living in this, being in this landscape, recorded by a number of people in the 19th century. The surveys that followed Burke and Wills, who were perished in this little landscape. Hodgkinson identified Aboriginal village sites as well. We've been undertaking archaeological investigations. These are some of the gunyahs. Some of the gunyahs can still be seen in the landscape. This is a geophysical survey identifying magnetic anomalies which represent old fireplaces. So one of the sites is called Thunderpurdy Lagoon. The Native Police in 1871 document 103 gunyahs south of this site, and we've found, using the geophysical survey, these magnetic anomalies. When you make a fire and you create a hearth, you change the magnetic properties of the soil, and so we can detect these structures. The Mythica have also been very generous in allowing us to study the remains of their ancestors, and I won't go into the detail here, but teeth are a little bit like a GPS unit. You know, they document the isotope signature you're ingesting from the landscape. So if you are moving between different geological catchments, you'll see in the enamel lines in the teeth stop growing around the age of 13, 14. The enamel lines don't get laid down any further. But you can see how mobile or sedentary people are. And what we're seeing in the Mythica is that they were very sedentary. And so we don't think there's an ethnographic analogue that matches carefully what this society looked like. We have some ethnohistoric accounts which are quite sketchy, and there are fragmented stories from the elders and speaking to the Gorenjas and people like that. They talk about their father saying, look, your life now is working on stations. We don't need to think about this old past. There is a fragmented knowledge of what occurred. And so archaeology, I think in this instance, has played an important role in reconnecting people with these landscapes. That site on the left was recorded by Alice Duncan Kemp as the Debney Peace site. And it's a site where there was a treaty signed in 1879. Tom Griffiths has written on this, which was around a large ceremony that occurred at Whamalichi Channels. That was an important common ground. According to Duncan Kemp and others, and around 800 people met and decided to call a stop to the frontier wars, and at all accounts the massacres stopped occurring after that event. But there are really significant cultural places, thanks Kim, such as this stone arrangement Scott Kane contacted me to discuss the potential of this linking to a Scorpius initiation that he documented in the Central Desert. He thought this arrangement looked like the Scorpius constellation. We've done magnetometer surveys identifying that there was a lot of fire used around this site in the past, and some of the ethno-historic accounts by Alice Duncan Kemp talks about fire and its use in ceremony. So we're using these ethno-historic fragments to try to reconstruct this ancient past. Other sites, for example, we thought initially this may have been a fish trap. Looking at it more carefully, it's an area where you don't get regular channel flow. It's associated with a large curvilinear stone arrangement. Alice Duncan Kemp has recorded accounts of the rainbow serpent in that area. You know, we've excavated this. This seems to be a large dam. So, you know, the site is, you know, about 40 kilometres from Lake Makati and 30 k's from the channel. So if there were people doing activity at that site around ceremony, they would need to have available water to maintain the business of the site. And adjacent to this are many hearths, and we excavate these specific sites, and we're able to recover lots of plant remains working with archaeobotanists. And we can see some morphological change over time. And this is a grant funded by the ASC called Testing the Dark Emu Hypothesis. So we're trying to work out if plants are being modified over time. This is a massive field of channel millet. We've got plant geneticists working on this. The genetics is as complex as sugarcane, which requires, you know, requires human interaction. Channel millet seems to have gone through multiple boom and bust phases and has got this really distinct sort of low heterozygosity, which is a very unusual genetic signature. And I'll flick through these things quickly. Loads of grinding stones. The ethno-historic information is recorded that 75 different plant species were used and processed through grinding stones. We've published on some of this. So really, I agree with Kingsley that there are problems with this approach to looking at sites. And, you know, this approach still dominates our heritage registers in the eastern part of the country. But they do provide a tangible connection to the past, and if we look at these places in the broader landscape and can incorporate intangible heritage when it still exists, I think we can produce a much richer understanding of these landscapes. And there is the potential now. Sorry, I wrote this very quickly a little while ago, so there's a few typos there. There's the potential for these sort of places to be recorded as broader landscapes. The Part 6 studies, we've done some of these on Western Cape York. We're working on one at the moment, the Macquarie. The National Heritage Listing, the Mythica sites have been nominated, they've now been inscribed on the National Heritage Register. The next step will be, we hope, World Heritage Listing. Indigenous protected areas. I think archaeology can do its best work when it works with communities to try to integrate intangible heritage with the signature of the archaeological record and record and preserve these larger landscapes. Now, long after the survey is finished, I think it's also important that the work that we generate can produce educational resources, can support the development of cultural centres and museums if they're feasible in some landscapes. The Mythica work has funded a state and federally, helped support, a state and federally funded range of programs. So there's much hope, I think, in maintaining the importance of investigating site, but it needs to be looked in the broader concept of cultural landscapes. And there are now mechanisms to enable us to protect broader cultural landscapes in the east. But of course, there are always challenges in getting places nominated to this level of protection. Thank you very much.